Good vibrations.
We are on volume 152, and we're talking today about what I'm dubbing satanic sounds and demonic sonics. Kind of like the way that sounds. I have done a show quite similar to this one in the past, so regular listeners might remember I had Long Lasting on a few years ago, who's a hip-hop producer, and we got into similar topics. But I wanted to bring in my guest today, who has been on the show before, and a lot of people will be familiar with him, because he's doing a lot at the moment. We're talking Jason Lindgren. First of all, welcome back, Jason.
Hey, Mark. Thank you so much for having me back.
So people would know you as the co-host of Crrow 777 Radio. Prior to that, you were the host of your own Secrets of Saturn show, which I guested on, and I see that's come back recently after a bit of a hiatus. You're doing a whole bunch of shows out there. I heard some live streams you did with Wayne McCroy. I heard you on a round table show with Crrow and Owen Benjamin recently, so you're pretty active at the moment.
Yes, I've been very active. I did revive my Secrets of Saturn channel, and we've been doing weekly live streams, Wayne and myself. This week will be number 8, so we've been doing them weekly for about 2 months now. And Crrow and the Great Baldini have guested on with us, but the main part of the show is Wayne and myself, and we're discussing a lot of the same similar topics, but I wanted to give Wayne a platform where if there's things he wanted to get out, he doesn't have a channel or anything like that built up, and Wayne and I are very old friends. We actually grew up together, so it's been working out really, really well. Crrow and I decided to retire our secondary show, Crrow 777 Live, which was every Sunday on TFR. And because I've been doing so well with live streams and getting great audience there, Crrow and I are going to do a live stream together as our secondary show on my channel in the same time slot. So every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern.
Okay. Just remind me why you called that show Secrets of Saturn.
Well, a few years back, when I decided to start producing my own material, I came up with the name Cult of Saturn for any music I was going to release, and the name Secrets of Saturn for the podcast I was going to start. And reason being that a lot of this Saturnian symbology and all that gets caught up with what the elite do. So I figured if I use these terms and people like what they hear and they start doing internet searches, they're going to find a heck of a lot more than a podcast and some rock and roll music.
So we were chatting online a few weeks ago, and we kicked around the idea of this show. And what I want to do is discuss basically what is wrong with contemporary pop and electronic music and what's going into it. I'm sure a lot of people listening to this show will know what I mean when I say that, but we will be laying down exactly what we do mean by these statements. I wanted to get you on because you're a music producer and a studio engineer in your own right. You know a lot about sonics, and you're an audiophile. So I wanted to get your expert opinion on some of these god-awful records, in my opinion, that are getting dished out to young people in these times. And we were just talking off air there about how we risk sounding like our dads 30 years ago, moaning about kids today and what's going into music. And I do have very clear memories of my dad banging on the banister from downstairs, saying, "Turn that bloody rubbish down! What is that anyway?" And I know I sound like him now, but I do think we have a point here, and I do think we are justified in taking this stance with some of this stuff. So I don't know if you want to make an opening statement along those lines in terms of what you feel is going on with contemporary current chart pop music before we get into any specifics.
Well, just to give everybody a very quick background, I'm in my 40s. I have been a guitar player since high school, and I always had a love for gear, and I went from there into learning how to do the studio side of things because I wanted to be able to make my own recordings. And I actually started learning right at the end of the tape days, meaning you had to record to tape because digital hadn't come to complete fruition yet. Some digital was starting to be around in the 90s, but nowhere near to the degree that it took off with the original Digidesign M boxes and all that. And I remember when those first came out and got one, and it was mind-numbing to be able to do what the great big studios could do in your own home now. And I've learned all the way up, and I actually worked as a professional retail musical instrument and gear purveyor for many, many years, and I actually worked on the install side of things too, where I'd have to go into locations, figure out what they need, and sell them the appropriate gear and get them someone to install it and all that sort of thing. So I've been around the gear for 20 plus years, and I'm quite familiar with it. And I would never claim to be the be-all, end-all to a studio engineer producer, but I'm very familiar with how things are done, and I'm pretty good. I produce our material for the podcast and everything, and I've done some of my own music, so I do know what I'm doing. I would never win a Grammy, I don't think, but I think you have to be on the inside baseball for that anyway. But all that being said, there is definitely something different over the past 10-odd years, probably starting in the very late 90s. And I think a lot of it has to do with the digital thing. Like the way they can manipulate things now is quite different than what you had to do when you had nothing but analog tape.
Yeah. I don't go much on your chances of getting a Grammy after this show, to be honest with you, but who'd want one anyway? So yeah, I remember the days of working with analog tape as well. We've had this discussion before. I used to work in radio stations, and actually in the novel that I've just brought out, The Cause and the Cure, it's set in a radio newsroom in 1990, 30 years ago, based on my memory of those times. And really, I just wanted to pay homage to the last days of analog formats. So the book talks about reels of tape and cartridges that used to get used in radio stations, and cassettes, taping stuff off the radio. Remember that? 45 minutes each side, and then you have to flip it over. And just old-fashioned stuff like that, having to fish around for coins in your pocket to put into a payphone in the street when you wanted to make a call, because nobody had mobile phones in those days. So I'm a nostalgist. I'm guilty of that, of looking back on past times with misty-eyed memories, you know. But yeah, I remember those days as well, and things have definitely changed. Everything's electronic now, everything's digital, and to me, most of it sounds all the bloody same. Again, I'm sounding like my dad now, who used to say this to me 30 years ago when things didn't all sound the same, but they did to him. But they do to me now, because it's the same templates and methods that just seem to be getting rolled out time and time again. Some other observations that I've got about these times are how charts have become completely meaningless now. I mean, back when I was at school in the 80s, it used to be like a religious ritual to gather around the radio cassette player on a Tuesday lunchtime when they unveiled the new chart numbers, because it was important. You needed to know who was number one. You needed to know who was in the top five. And there was this real obsession with it among kids at the time. These days, I don't think anyone gives a shit about charts. I couldn't tell you a number one from the last 10 years, I don't think. It just seems to have become completely meaningless. And I think one of the things that's contributed to that is the formats in which music is now delivered. So back in my day, it was vinyl records. You went out and actually bought a piece of vinyl in a sleeve with elaborate artwork, and you know the record sleeve was as important as the album itself in many cases. These days it's in the form of MP3s, and it's digital icons on a screen. They're delivered via streaming or downloads. There's often no artwork attached. It's just not important. And because of that, the records just seem to be less important. They don't stick around for as long as they used to. Like I say, there's no such thing as charts anymore that mean anything. And it's all very transitory. And it all sounds the bloody same as well. Just a few observations from me there. I don't know if you would agree with most of that.
Well, there still are charts. I don't think it's quite to the relevancy, like you're saying, how it was important on the social aspect. I don't see that either. I have a young daughter, and I know she doesn't give a flip. But funny enough, she recognizes how god-awful a lot of the modern pop music is. And she listens to stuff from the 90s and the 2000s is the majority of her favorites. And she does actually have a liking for the old school stuff that I like. That's even before my time. I like a lot of 60s and 70s music, and I was born in 1973, so obviously I didn't live through that time. But that, what is, in my opinion, very well-written music and well-composed and all that, and had a lot going on, that appeals to me and always has for a very, very long time. So I'm very glad that my daughter is not caught up in the most recent stuff, but I listened to the tracks that you sent to me, and the one thing I did notice, and they're all contemporary, they're all within the latest few years, they all had an incredibly similar quality to them. And the one thing I can say is, like, let's even take something like Pink Floyd. You would never say that two Pink Floyd songs sound so identical. It's ridiculous. Even ones from the same album. Like, let's take Wish You Were Here from, I think it's 1974 or 75, somewhere around there. And the song Wish You Were Here and the song Welcome to the Machine sound nothing alike. I think even your dad would be able to tell the difference between them. You know, they're vastly different. And these songs, while they had some differences as far as what they were saying and things like that, they've been homogenized. It's a beat. Predominantly what I was hearing was a beat. And it was done in an almost hypnotic kind of way. Now, I have an excellent sound system. I have a very high-end studio monitoring system, a 2.1, meaning 2 tops plus a sub, so I can hear the full frequency range. And the one thing I can tell you is that beat is mixed very heavy in the low end so that it's like kicking really, really, really hard, very tight, very hard, so it feels like it's coming at you. And that's just something that didn't exist years ago. They didn't have the capabilities to deliver like that. So even when I listen to an old Pink Floyd album or an old Beatles album or any of the stuff from yesterday that's been remastered, it just doesn't have that much data there in those registers to kick you in the head in the same way. So that's like initial observations. I can hear things going on that are almost like a hypnotic trance kind of thing. And of course, I think that's on purpose.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to go into these 4 tracks that I sent you so the listeners can share in the experience. So, you know, get an exorcist's phone number at the ready, get some holy water, or at the very least, get a shower handy, because you're going to feel pretty dirty after listening to some of this stuff, I feel. We'll go straight into it with Tones and I, who is an Australian artist, it says here. And this is a track called Dance Monkey from just a few months ago, which was really big in 2019, one of the biggest selling tunes of the year, and it was a worldwide hit. So let's play a little piece of this, and then we'll come off the back of it, and we'll see what we think is going on. All right, we get the idea. Wow. I mean, to me, that voice doesn't actually sound human. It sounds like some entity has taken over. That track, I just find it deeply disturbing to listen to. The video is a bit unsettling as well. It's very, very weird. Initial impressions on that one, mate?
I'd never heard of that artist. I use that term lightly. And I didn't know if it was a male or a female or what was going on because I was watching the visuals at the same time.
It's allegedly a white Australian female. But you wouldn't know it from the video because you've got some bloody actor playing the part of some old boy in an old folks' home just going into spasms to this song. That's why I say it's a very strange video.
I think that is the artist because I went and looked her up. I think she's in the costume.
Oh, it could be her, yeah.
I mean, I'm not 100% certain. I didn't go and look up all the videos, but it looked like her in all the makeup and the wigs and everything. And, of course, the first thing that jumped out at me when we put it on is that she's wearing black and white checkered pants through the whole thing. So the symbolism is just so prominent. Like I'm so used to doing this now. It's like I look at it and it's like, oh, okay. Yeah. You know, it's like, boom, right in your face. Yeah. But as far as the actual music side of it, which is what we're focusing on, it almost reminded me of like a sassy little child or maybe like a tweenie singing. That's why it really threw me off. Like it was almost disturbing in a way. Like, I'm a sassy little girl and I'm going to sing at you. Like almost in a what would be the word I'm looking for? Like it's like something's wrong here. And now this song actually was structured like a song, which is not what a lot of the other ones were like, in the sense that it actually had a chorus, a hook to it, and things like that. So that was a little more traditional. But again, it had that very hypnotic, the way the beat was. And
do you feel something has been done to the voice? Do you feel there's no way she's going to be able to get up on a stage and replicate that song live because there's been manipulation of the voice?
I think that there's always manipulation of the voice, unless you're talking about very traditional kind of music like opera or something like that. For the most part, I would say that voices are manipulated. Now, I can't say that about everybody because if I listen to people who've been around a long time, like, for instance, Noel Gallagher's got new albums out, I don't really hear auto-tune on his voice, and I doubt very much he would allow it. And if there is, it's very, very minimal. Like his voice still sounds natural to me. You know what I mean? But auto-tune in most pop music, anything that's got a very highly processed modern sound, they want everything to be so perfect. Like, for instance, you know how they do harmonies and things like that, like voice stacking, making, if you're a guitar player, for instance, or a piano player, you're making chords, you're putting notes together to form a fuller sound. A lot of that isn't even real these days. It's just the same note of the initial line replicated and then moved up or down in autotune, or the other one that's really popular is called Melodyne, which is actually the one I use in my studio work. But they do the same thing. It's audio. It's pitch correction. But the algorithms are so good now that unless you're yanking really, really far, you can do it and it'll sound reasonably natural. But what they do is they overprocess it to the point that it has like this weird quality to it that's almost computer-like, but not quite.
Well, you see, to me, the overuse of auto-tune completely diminishes the original purpose of it. So we're told it's for pitch correction, it's for singers that might just miss that note they're trying to hit, and so the software corrects it for them. But it's so over-embellished now that it makes the singers sound like robots. And it's my view that this is on purpose. They want the voices to sound artificial and unnatural. But it does defeat the whole object of what auto-tune is supposed to be for.
Well, it's being used in a different way now. I don't want to compliment it, but it's almost being played like an instrument. And you're correct. Pitch correction's been around a long time. Like, you could even do things like that with tape if you really were patient. But pitch correction technology is fantastic when you have, say, a really good singer who was pouring their heart out, great emotion, everything, and was just a little bit off on one note. But you're like, damn, that performance was so good. I wish we could fix that one little note.
Sure.
Well, that's what it's used for. That's what I've always used, even in my own music. Like, if I sang really well, I was like, ooh, I was a tiny bit flat there. Well, I can bump it up that little bit because it's not even going to be a half step. It's going to be a couple cents off, but just enough that you can hear it's not matching the music right. You bump it up that little bit, and boom, there it is. It's in key. Sounds great. That was the initial use. I've read stuff going all the way back into the 90s. An album everyone will be totally familiar with is What's the Story? Morning Glory by Oasis. I didn't even think about the fact that they would have used pitch correction on it, but they used an Eventide DSP 4000. Liam was struggling a little bit to get the vocals right on Champagne Supernova, and he was doing it by himself with the engineer-producer guy, and he was a little off, and he just ran it through the Eventide, bumped it up. I didn't know that. I can't tell because it's so natural, and he was only off a little bit, that just bumped it up that little bit. He's in key. Sounds great. They were megastars back then. So this stuff's been going on all the way back whenever that album came out, 95, I think. And, of course, people are very, very familiar with the Cher song, If You Believe in Life After Love. I don't know if that's the exact title. That's one of the earliest.
I think it's called.
Yeah, that song. So that's one of the earliest examples where autotune was being used in a very creative way. And what that is they're hard tuning it, meaning that it's yanking. If you think of digital as straight lines as opposed to analog, which is smooth waves, the hard tune would be like you're just taking a note and you're yanking it, and they did a step line, so it's going do 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 do. I hope I'm making sense. And it's just yanking it up, yanking it back down. And so she goes, "Do you believe in life after love?" And the step would go blah, 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 blah. And it sounded cool. And from that point on, people were like, "Oh, you can do that." And it was being used repeatedly from that point onward because it got into the mainstream. That sound became normal, and people wanted to start doing it. Especially a lot of rap and hip hop artists really
became known as
towards
the Cher effect. And that record came out in 1996. There was a bit of a gap before the hip-hop community really started embracing auto-tune. I pinpoint that as around 2007, 2008. There was a massive explosion of it within the genre referred to as hip-hop in 2008. And I carried a story about this in Volume 1 of Musical Truth. The software itself was developed by this guy called Andy Hildebrand of Antares Technologies, I think it was. And his background was he used sonar sound waves to map geology to map landscapes and stuff using sound. That was his scientific background. And he realized that this application could have uses in the music industry. So he developed this, primary version of autotune. That's how it came about.
Right, in the software side of things. Earlier on, the first company that was really, really, really good at doing pitch shifting is Eventide, and they actually invented the first digital device. And I don't want to bore everybody with a history lesson, but I always thought this was very interesting. In the early 70s, they invented the H910, and it was the earliest digital processor. But because it had so many analog stages with it, it doesn't sound overly processed. It just has this really interesting sound, and of course every studio had to have one. And its initial uses, in fact, were in broadcasting because it could do slight time shifting as well. They were able to speed up, I forget the name of the station, but it was a New York television station was the first ones to buy this, and they were running episodes of I Love Lucy 10% faster to get more commercials in, and it was having the chipmunk effect. So they used the H910 to slow the audio back down so that it sounded in normal pitch, and people didn't realize that that's what was going on, and that's kind of how that whole thing took off. And then studios got a hold of them, and the rest is history. So people in the technological side of things have been trying to bend space and time for a long time, but it's being used in, if you want to say, creative ways, and to the point that it's ridiculous now. Now, you're right, in the mid-2000s-ish, it started becoming known as the T-Pain effect, where he's...
What happened to T-Pain? Who cares?
Yeah, he's not even really... You're not even really hearing him anymore. It's just it's just doing the step thing constantly.
Stands for tinnitus pain.
Right, and you're not even really hearing him as an artist anymore. It's literally all you're hearing is the auto-tune on perpetually. So,
and you've got this dude, Future, who's exactly the same way now. We're going to get round to one of his tracks. A so-called rapper, I use the term very lightly, called Future. And that name will be no accident either when it comes to this stuff.
I know you're a fan of a lot of this kind of music going back into the 90s, and there's a huge difference between what rap and hip-hop would have been then compared to what it is now.
Oh, for sure.
And the digital technology that was just coming out then was used in an incredibly creative in a way that I actually really respect. They were taking little digital snippets because you didn't have a lot of memory back then or a high bit rate, so it kind of had like this almost grainy kind of quality because there wasn't a lot of resolution to work with, but they're taking snippets out of really well-produced records, old R&B stuff and disco and things like that.
The art form of sampling.
Right, and then they're taking these beats, they had just enough time to get a full phrase in there, so they'd have the whatever beat they chose, and then they'd write songs around that. Very, very, very different than what goes on today.
Sure. I know Crrow is a big hip-hop fan. I know when he's not doing shows, he's got his back-to-front baseball cap on and he's breakdancing and he's got his aerosol can for the graffiti. So shout to Crrow, homeboy. Okay, so we should probably move on to the next tune that I want to analyse. And this one is Skrillex featuring Boys Noise and Ty Dolla $ign. It's called Midnight Hour. So let's play a little snippet of this and we discuss what we think might be going on. There's the demon coming through. I mean, I know people could think that I sound like an old bastard moaning about the state of music today, but you can look at it another way, in that I've got some heritage in the game. I've been a DJ for 30 years. I do remember different eras, different times when music production styles were very different to what they are now. I've been around a bit, I've seen some things, I've travelled all over the world, I've met people all over the world, and I've had all kinds of discussions about music, so I like to think that I am qualified and I've got some point of reference to compare what we're getting served up with today to what went before. And when it comes to dance and club music, what we just listened to there bears no resemblance to what people were getting down to 15, 20, 25 years ago. It sounds very 21st century. It's, again, completely electronic, completely digital, completely artificial. There's no natural musicianship going on there. There's obviously programming of the sounds, and people could argue that there's a creative element to that. But it's not music in the way music has been understood to be for several previous generations. So I'll bat it over to you there, Jason, in terms of your professional opinion on that track. But yeah, that's how I feel about it.
Now, what I know about Skrillex is that he came to prominence doing a lot of remixes of other people's music. So he does indeed create his own beats and things like that for what he has released under his name. But again, this one with that tick, 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 that's going through the whole thing. And again, very hypnotic. Like this music, it's not hypnotic in the way Shine On You Crazy Diamond is, you know, where it's
right.
like flowing. And I even have a song that I wrote that's kind of got that kind of flowiness to it, where I use certain kinds of effects to make you feel like you're traveling along, and sing-songy lyrics, that kind of things. That's very different than this. This almost sounds like you're being put into a hypnotic spell, and then a beat pumping at you constantly. And I gotta wonder if what are things like in clubs these days? I don't know if you still do DJing in
well,
like.
No,
the
I
big...
give clubs a wide berth these days, because if that's the kind of stuff that's going to be ringing off, then it's my idea of hell. So I'd rather have an early night with a cup of cocoa, I think. But mainly that music now, from what I can make out, is getting played at dance festivals, these massive events, primarily open air, where you have hundreds of thousands of people in attendance at a time. And it's literally all over the world. It's in every corner of the world now that electronic dance music is popular. And I've done many lectures on this, and I mentioned it in Musical Truth too, in terms of what the effect can be on the human subconscious when large numbers of people are being exposed to music of that nature, digital, combined with the visuals that get flashed up at these festivals. And in so many cases, in almost all cases, the images, the motifs, the icons that are getting flashed up on the screen, often within a fraction of a second, so it goes straight into the subconscious mind before the conscious mind has a chance to analyse what's going on and process it. They're all kind of metaphysical, esoteric, supernatural in nature, religious in nature. You get a lot of UFO and ET type imagery going on, go figure. And you have that combined with the drugs that go around at these events. So there's MDMA, there's cocaine, there's all kinds of other stuff, amphetamines getting consumed at these events. So I've speculated for a long time on what happens when you have that cocktail of influences, that cocktail of assaults on the human senses through the visuals, through the audio, and through the altered states of consciousness coming from the drugs. So that is the sort of music that you get at all these big dance festivals. And another thing about the images that get pushed at these things, they all hint at artificial intelligence and transhumanism and the futurist kind of smart grid Internet of Things society that we're moving into. So it seems to me as if these events and this so-called music is being used to make palatable these ideas of what life is going to be in the future to very susceptible, very malleable young people. I'm going on a bit of a rant there, but that's how I feel tunes like that fit into this overall agenda.
I think you're spot on. This sort of technology, if you want to call it that, has been going back decades, probably all the way back to the 40s at least, where they were figuring out what drugs can be used to manipulate the mind.
Right.
And the way you're describing these festivals, I'm not surprised at all. And you're correct about the transhumanism. And these artists using this technology currently, they're dehumanizing themselves and making it okay. People are accepting the fact that it's dehumanized. And I've been saying this a lot. I think these transhumanist concepts where people are trying to cyborg themselves, they're trying to turn you into an it. All these problems we're having with people don't know what their gender is. You know, they can't decide if they're a boy, a girl, or a toaster. Right. You know, it's just getting to the point of ridiculousness. But how much easier it is to manipulate somebody to become one with the machine when you don't view yourself as human anyway. You are part of the technology. The technology is part of you. And I think that's exactly what's going on. So when you're talking about a complete combination of visual images, which will absolutely have a hypnotic effect, it's quite obvious the music has a hypnotic effect, and then you're combining that with drugs that are putting you into some sort of altered state. Good grief, you must come out of there a complete destroyed mess. And let me assure you that with especially modern music, and this could have been done way back when, there were lots of accusations of backmasking and all that sort of things, even back into the 60s, meaning that you're putting hidden messages on the music. That's incredibly easy nowadays with virtually unlimited tracks. You could put anything you want in there, mix it in. Goodness knows what they're saying or telling you to do. Whatever. It could be literally anything. They could be putting magic spells in there, for lack of a better term. And using all of this energy, and there's something to the concept of energy to create esoteric events. Let's put it that way.
Well, you might be familiar with a story that I've recounted many times. Going back to the 1970s, there was this guy that worked in the American record industry by the name of John Todd Collins. And he was talking in this interview that he gave sometime back in the 70s of this standard practice that there used to be of analog master recordings of records that all the big labels were going to put out into the marketplace. All these companies, these record companies, had an altar room in their corporate HQ where they would bring a coven of witches in. This is in his words. He actually breaks it down like this. And he says that the witches would perform a ritual, and they would imbue the master recording of this album with this dark, malevolent energy, so that every time a copy is made of that album, it carries some of that signature energy out into the end user marketplace. Now, if that's what was going on in the 1970s with analog vinyl recordings, the mind boggles as to what could be happening now in these times with these electronic production methods. So if the intention is still the same, Lord only knows what is going into the recordings now.
Well, let's be really honest here. We know that people doing dark things are in control of these major corporations. And no matter what the artist may or may not start out doing, meaning that they might be an artist in their youth, they want to do music as a profession. They're playing shows, they're writing their songs, whatever. But I think for the most part, and I don't like making absolutes, I don't like to draw absolute lines, but I think for the most part that if you're going to be released through a major label where they're going to put a stupid amount of money behind you, and no matter how good you are, people have to understand that a large sum of money gets put behind anyone, any artist or band, to basically shove it down your throat that you love this, buy it, which is why so much music today is awful, because they've got this marketing technique down now. They'll just pump something out at you in every conceivable way that you're going to like it. Again, hypnotic effect, these beats. Now, this was going on. Now, I'm very familiar with the John Todd stuff. I don't think this was ever truly confirmed, like his exact description, but no one is fooled into thinking who's into this movement that there aren't dark things going on with the elite. Like, everybody knows that they're into some very serious dark esoteric stuff. Luciferianism is one word that's thrown around a lot, and I don't doubt that that's true.
Well, if you're paying attention, you know this stuff anyway.
Right, and of course it gets all tied up with Masonic symbolism and just all sorts of things, and we don't even need to go into that. I think anybody who listens to you, or even with the work I do, they know this. So what John Todd said, whether he was recounting an actual true story or not, I have no doubt that such things go on. And you even have people in the modern times like Lana Del Rey who outright says, I'm a witch, and I don't like the president, so I'm going to put a black spell on him, like that kinds of things. Like, you couldn't say that in the 60s or 70s. Right. So people who think that music that came out way back when on major labels, mind you, didn't have something done to it. No matter how good the music is, no matter how good the writing, the harmonies, all that, no matter how good it was, if it was released through a major label and all that money had to get put behind it, don't be naive enough to think that there wasn't an ulterior motive, that there isn't an ulterior motive. It's just naive to think it. And I know there was an incident recently with somebody that Crrow's been on and you've been on, thinking that the band America is wonderful and they're Gnostic warriors. I can't even remember what they were saying, but it's like, you're being naive. No one's taking away the fact that they're talented musicians, but don't think for a second that if a major label is putting a stupid amount of money behind them, that there isn't an ulterior motive.
Well, this is the thing with so many musicians and so many bands. It becomes obvious that they're controlled assets of the corporate machine that is the record industry. But every now and again they put out a song which appears to be enlightening, uplifting, meaningful, conscious. And you can be tricked into thinking, wow, this artist has seen the light and they're trying to help us and try and put out a message to uplift humanity. Well, what if those songs are put out from time to time to give the impression that these people are on your side and they see life exactly the same as you and they're trying to communicate a message to you? What if that is to get you off your guard so that you continue to trust them and you continue to lap up all their material, so that as you continue to follow them, you're also absorbing all the agenda-pushing stuff that they're putting out there as well? I call this the disarmament tactic, which occurs with artists. I've discussed it in my book, and I feel that's what's going on. So you could pinpoint pretty much any major influential band of the past 50 years, and somewhere in their canon of work you would find songs that appear to be of that conscious, meaningful nature. Does that mean they're conscious, meaningful musicians? Or does it mean that it's just a song?
Well, that's the thing. This is what I always say. You don't know what their true origins are. They might be quite humble and well-meaning, but once you get into the corporate machine, and of course they do construct bands too. People know the most obvious ones like boy bands and things like that are constructed as groups. But
the Monkees.
Right, that's probably the earliest really good example of pop music. But even they kind of got tired of being not real and started learning their own instruments and not just taking other people's music that was written for them and performing it. Right. So, that was still in the day where a lot of musicianship had to be had. Like, you couldn't be completely talentless and be in the music industry, no matter what your intentions were in the 60s and 70s. But that's beside the point. The notion that they aren't being manipulated at that level is just ridiculous. And again, it may not even be the artist's intention with their music, but you're going to do what you're told once you're under contract. And of course, most of these people are very young at the time they're brought in. They get turned on to a lavish lifestyle. They may have their own particular taste of addictive things, whether it's drugs, alcohol, sex of some sort. Who knows? Whatever it is, probably a combination of all those things. I mean, how many rock star stories do you hear that don't involve some sort of addictiveness? And it's obvious. They just get these people addicted to whatever their fancy is, and they manipulate them for as long as they're useful. And that's that,
Just another day at the office.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to this third track that I've got lined up, Billie Eilish. Now, the hype around this individual reminds me of what happened with Lady Gaga when she was first launched in around about 2008. So everyone, whether it's, at a corporate level in the industry or the average kid in the street, is saying, oh, Billie Eilish, yeah, she's the next big thing. She's going to be massive. She's really hot. So it's obvious that she's being lined up to be the next big thing, another manufactured hero. So let's take a listen to a little piece of this track. Can we call it a track? Can we call it music? Called Bad Guy.
I'm the bad guy.
So there's a few things that kind of come to mind when I watch that video and listen to that song. Demonic possession, mental illness, dissociation, satanic ritual abuse, trauma-based mind control, all that good stuff, stuff Vigilant Citizen talks about every week. It's all there. I find that song very disturbing to listen to. It's very unsettling. It doesn't make me feel good. It's not my idea of entertainment. What do you think is going on in that one, Jason?
That was very disturbing. Again, young girl. I mean, she's only 18 now, I think. So some of this music that she came out with a few years ago, supposedly she's writing when she's 15. Now you start getting into, that's kind of hard to believe. But whatever. Again, she's kind of got that sassy little girl thing going on, but she's not particularly attractive, and she's quite bluntly creepy. And the song that she got known for, Ocean Eyes, I think it's called, that one wasn't that bad. But this stuff, I actually listened to another one and watched the video for it off the same album that this one you sent me. And it's pure manipulation, beginning to end. Now, their approach with her, I guess I should say, is a little different than some of the other ones where there's tons of vocal harmonies and things like that with But everything that's layered there, like massive layering, again has a hypnotic quality to it. It's in a stab out, come back, but with an underlying beat thing going on. And I heard multiple things going on underneath that, and combine that with the visuals I saw in the video. Good freaking grief! It's normalizing almost like an MK Ultra abuse kind of thing, tied in with sex, and
she's got blood all over her face. Why?
Yeah.
Why has she got blood over her face in the video? There's no ostensible reason for it to be there.
Just disturbing, man. Like, why would anyone be okay with this? Like, how do you not recognize that there's something disturbing going on here? And this is a young girl. What's
so depressing is when you read the comments on the YouTube video and people are saying, "Oh, she's so creative. She's so different. She's so individual." No, she's not. She's just another manufactured puppet. But people are just buying this, and they're saying, "Oh yeah, great song, great video. She's so cool." They just can't see that this is just wrong stuff that's being pushed on them.
I found the whole thing incredibly disturbing, and I can only assume she is a tortured soul that they're manipulating and using, especially because she's so young. She would have been brought into the music business around 15, 16 at the latest, because I looked her up. Her birthday is December 18th, 2001, and it's 2020, so how old does that make her? 18.
Right.
Now, today. So even that song that we're listening to was probably recorded when she was 17. And man, that one's just disturbing beyond all belief that they have her doing all of this imagery tied in with this hypnotic music. And while it was well produced, I can't argue that. Again, lots and lots and lots of vocals in this stuff that you don't see in the hip hop music and things like that, because it's not done like that. That's more speaking, of course. So you're not going to have a lot of vocal harmony and things like that. But it almost reminds me of the artist Lorde. I don't even know if she's still around anymore, but she always had really good harmonies in her music, but it didn't sound anywhere near as twisted as this is. This is almost like a combination of sick fantasies turned into, man, I don't know. The whole thing just turned me off. I actually took a break from listening to this stuff, watching this stuff after I saw that one, and then came back to get to the rest of them.
I don't blame you.
Just very disturbing, yeah.
Well, one thing is she's clearly not being marketed as any kind of sex kitten in the same way the likes of Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera and Miley Cyrus and Taylor Swift and all these were, because there's nothing sexy in inverted commas about her image at all. She's kind of androgynous. She's got this dark sort of gothic look. And it's anything but tying into the same sort of agenda that all these plastic pop puppets I just mentioned were put out as. So maybe we should be grateful for that. Just a break from the routine.
Well, I noticed that about a lot of these kind of musicians. The first one you played for me, which I've thankfully forgotten the name of, but that first song, that's not an attractive individual either. So this is kind of interesting because they're marketing females in a way that never was traditionally done. Normally, if you were marketed as a female artist, pop artist especially, there was a sexual aspect. Like they wanted them to be at least reasonably attractive, that they could at least doll them up and make them look good when needed. But these creatures are just like, ooh.
Remember Meghan Trainor a few years ago? It's all about the bass. She was a larger girl, and she obviously wasn't, being marketed in the same vein as all these other sex kittens either. And she was kind of encouraging larger girls listening to her music to embrace their body type and be proud of it and all this. So that was a bit of a departure from regular agendas as well.
Right, and maybe that was an attempt at normalization. Now, you do still have women in the industry that are attractive on the surface. Like, again, Lana Del Rey is certainly not ugly, but her music isn't marketed the same way. But again, there's this dark aspect to it where she herself says, I'm a witch. She performs black magic and things like that. So even though she happens to be a reasonably attractive female, there's still this on the surface, not even trying to hide it, dark aspect to her music. And her music, again, has a hypnotic quality to it. I've heard enough of it to know that they're intentionally lacing the way they layer the beats and the sounds that go with it. All of it is very carefully constructed, which is very easy to do in the modern era. Like so much is capable in this modern digital age. You can manipulate things with ease. There's no cutting and splicing and bouncing down of tape You could do pretty much anything you want. If you can conceive of it, it can be done in a studio these days. And honestly, if you're good enough and you know enough, you can do it with $100 box you bought at Guitar Center, and you took it home and just started manipulating.
Sure. Shall we move on to future?
Sure.
Should we do this? Is it wise? Yeah, I think we should. We'll complete the 4 tracks that I sent you with this. Then this is from a few years ago. I did discuss it with Long Lasting in that show that I did with him probably about 3 or 4 years ago. It's the remix of Karate Chop, Future featuring Lil Wayne. Let's get into this, if we must. That's enough of that. Ooh. Long Lasting described that at the time as sounding like a gibbering robot. And nobody else is ever going to have this kind of conversation, man. I mean, this is an elephant in the room in terms of how goddamn awful this garbage is and how satanic it is. But nobody ever has these kind of conversations about it. It seems like it's just left to me and a handful of people that I bring on. And I know DJs from back in the day that have been around as long as I have, that I used to associate with, who must clearly think that all this stuff is straight garbage, because I know their tastes. I know they're into soulful music, they're into the original essence of hip-hop. They must be listening to stuff like this and they're absolutely disgusted by it, yet you never hear them getting vocal about it. And many of them still play it in the clubs because they still want a career, they still want to get paid, so they just play whatever's in fashion at the time, but they can't be feeling it. And nobody else is calling this out. And it's so obvious what has been done to utterly destroy and bastardize this beautiful art form of hip-hop as it once was. It's no wonder people like Crrow and others, just decry the whole genre, because they're probably listening to this type of stuff and rightfully dismissing it all as straight garbage, which it is. But it didn't always used to be like this. This is why it's so painful and so difficult for me to have to acknowledge what it's become. I mean, what was that piece of shit we just listened to there?
Well, again, hypnotic qualities, but that one, oh my God, that sounds like a gibbering maniac. But I think there's ulterior motives there, and I do wonder if the way the syllables are being broken up, if there isn't something else going on there. Not that I could tell you exactly what that is, but I'm highly suspicious. I honestly had a hard time understanding the words, despite this is a modern mix, and I should not, under any circumstances, have trouble hearing anything. It should be properly mixed and mastered coming out of a multi-million-dollar studio, which I'm sure it was. So whatever's there isn't intentional. But the things going on in the background, it almost sounded like you were inside a crazy person's head. Now, this one, even though I looked up the lyrics and all that, and it has a quote-unquote hook to it, the beat never changed. Nothing changed. In traditional songwriting, and I am a songwriter, so I do this as well, your hook is the thing that stands out, the thing that grabs the attention and sums the point of the song. What is the song is basically about, and you're going to repeat that throughout the song, because that's the way a song generally gets broken down is the verses are like your story fleshed out, and your chorus is the overall theme of the song repeated, might have some changes throughout. The bridge is kind of like your breakdown to kind of spice it up, and if there's a solo and things like that, that's general songwriting. This thing never changed. It just had all of these crazy screaming things going on in the background with this gibbering vocal that was definitely not pronouncing things right. And then, of course, the other quote-unquote artist, Lil Wayne, I don't think I've ever seen a worse example or a better example of, holy crap, what is that? What are they doing to black culture? I mean, look at that person. That person could never have a real job if they weren't signed to a major record label. And this is what they're putting up as an icon for other people to look up to who are into this style. That's manipulation. And, of course, there's a lot of talk about Lil Wayne having different sexual tendencies as well, different deviances and things like that. So very, very disturbing. The whole thing just seems like it's hitting you over the head with a baseball bat sonically.
Yeah. It reminds me of a line from Elias Clay's track, Heavy Kool-Aid, where she says, "It's become ridiculous how dumbed down the scene is. Co-workers telling me Lil Wayne's a genius." She said that lyric was inspired by her day job, where people at her work were saying, "Oh, Lil Wayne, he's incredible, man. He's a genius." She's like, "Are you for real?" They're like, "Yeah, listen to the way he puts lyrics out there, and he's incredible. He's up there with KRS-One and Rakim and Big Daddy Kane and people like this." And she was just like, "We're lost. We're just completely lost if that's what kids think of the likes of Lil Wayne."
If people think that, I mean, come on. I looked at the lyrics. They're nothing but the thing that Crrow and I have decried. It's the modern foul ignorance, degradation of women, the accumulation of wealth, the flaunting of that wealth. Nothing else is important besides accumulation of things. That's what modern rap and hip hop pushes for the most part, like as far as the mainstream stuff.
That's the way it's been for the last 25 years.
Right. That's not what it was originally. It came from poor areas, usually poor black areas. So there wasn't talk all the time about money. It was more about the situation, trying to better yourself. I know a lot about that, where that came from, because I'm old enough to have watched it occur. I remember when it was a tiny little subset in culture, and they began introducing it to the mainstream through Yo MTV Raps, and they introduced it more and more as the years went by until it finally became the biggest thing ever. It took over the music channels in the airwaves, and now of course you have tons of songs, even country songs, that have to have someone featured, and you see this a lot with rap music too. It's like someone featuring someone. They're always guest starring on each other's programs.
Exactly. Yeah. Sometimes you have 4 guest artists. Just typing out the bloody artists on the song takes about 10 minutes. It's ridiculous. Now, the way all this stuff is marketed at young people is to make it the soundtrack to their generation, to their youth. And it's always been that way. I think back to my teenage years, and I can hear music from those times, and it just transports me back instantly to that mindset. I just remember what it was like to be young and carefree, and what I was doing, who I was hanging out with, what life was like in those times. And the sort of garbage that's being pumped out now is going to hold that same value to young people in these times, in 20 or 30 years, when they hear a record by Lil Wayne or Future, God forbid, they're going to think back to what they were doing in 2019 and 2020. So that's the way they always get the younger generation at any given time. They make this stuff the soundtrack to their youth, and it's made meaningful in that way. So that being the case, do you hold out much hope of being able to get through to the young minds that are being targeted with this stuff, to make them realise that it's all being done to agendas, there are ulterior motives at play, and music didn't always used to sound like this, and it's pretty clear that it's being used to prop up other plans in society? Do you think there's much hope of being able to get through to people in that way, or are they just going to dismiss you as some older guy that's completely out of touch with youth culture and doesn't know what he's talking about?
Sadly, that's probably true. But let's take a moment to discuss the power of nostalgia, because those young minds in 20 years are now going to be middle-aged minds, and they're going to be nostalgic for the music that impacted them in their youth. And think about what we just went through just in these 4 awful tracks. Think about the things that were being implanted in their mind, the manipulation, the things we were talking about, sexual abuse, love of things, dehumanization, like all of these things. What's the world going to be in 20 years if the transhumanists keep pushing the way they're pushing? Well, Ray Kurzweil says the singularity is going to be around in 2045. That's in 25 years. Hypothetically, Mark, you and I will still be alive then. God forbid nothing awful happens to us.
Hope so.
And the singularity is where the AI, the computers, are going to have a true intelligence. And they're working on technology now to merge ourselves with that intelligence. So the things that they're setting in today, the dehumanization, are going to be in the minds of these now 30s, 40s, and 50-year-olds when this technology comes to complete fruition. Think about that a moment. The youth don't stay the youth. My generation stuttering on TV with The Who in the 60s are now old men.
Right.
It happens to us all.
Well, I guess the only thing the likes of us can do is to keep on putting out information like this and making it clear that we're not just a couple of old guys moaning about how great things used to be and aren't anymore, but we're exposing agendas here. We're able to show that these things are being done by design. It's not natural artistic progression that we're looking at here. It's not just that scenes evolve organically over time. They're made to sound the way that they do by people whose full-time jobs it is to ensure this stuff gets done. So all we can really do is continue to offer the evidence for this, and expose the tactics and the methods that are being used, and then it's over to everyone else as to what they choose to do with that information.
Well, Mark, let me throw something out before we, I don't know how long we're going here for, but before we end up, Crrow and I had a conversation the other day that I brought up to him about when was the last great album, something that's going to last forever. And while I don't necessarily completely agree with where he was going with it, we had whittled it all the way back to The Wall by Pink Floyd. So that 1979. Because in the 80s, now people are going to be like, what? Are you crazy? But think about it. In the 80s is when everything started becoming super manufactured and just duplicates of each other, just whatever they could crank out to make a buck. And I would argue that there's probably some other great stuff in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. But what I was really trying to get to is that there is no more change. There's nothing else being done. Right around the 2000s, right after rap rock just kind of burned itself out, what was left? There's nothing left. And what I say to anybody who's a true musician, and I was around tons of them working in a retail store for years, selling musical instruments, they just want to write songs. They want to write good music. And that's all that's left. You just have to be a good songwriter now. There's nothing new going to be created. There's no next big thing that I could possibly see, because you can't get any heavier and faster, or else you just literally couldn't understand it. The rap can't get any edgier, meaning fouler in this day and age. Just what's left? There's nothing. It's just good songwriting. But that is not, for the most part, what we're getting spoon-fed from the major manufacturers. Even country music, I have to say that what I've heard of modern country music sounds incredibly template-ish. It just all sounds the same. Same harmonies, same structure, even the same mixing techniques. Like, it sounds so homogenized. And that's not to say that the individual artists aren't good. Some of them are great. Like, you have guitar players that absolutely are phenomenal players, but the songs themselves and the production behind it is extremely homogenized. And I see this across all the platforms now for the most part.
Yeah. I mean, alongside all the dark occult stuff that's getting put out, I've exposed a lot of the sinister side of, what's going into so-called hip-hop and electronic music and stuff. There's also another agenda at play, which is to put out incredibly bland, insipid, vacuous music and to market artists along those lines. And names that spring to mind there would be Ed Sheeran as the best example of it. Now, Ed Sheeran is being heralded as this worldwide superstar, and he's like the number one name out there right now. But to me, unless I've missed something and I've lost my ability to spot a good tune and a good hook and all this, there's absolutely nothing in his music that stands out in any way. It just sounds completely bland to me. And then, George Ezra and Sam Smith and artists such as this. So it seems to be that if they don't get you with all the kind of dark, malevolent stuff, they're just hitting you with this bland, boring, plastic, faceless, heartless, soulless stuff. Yeah,
totally. The only thing I've ever heard of Ed Sheeran I ever liked was the song he did for the Hobbit movies. I thought it was really pretty. But other than that, pretty, again, homogenized, even though he's doing traditional, almost folksy kind of singer-songwriter stuff. It's still just kind of boring. There was a band a few years back that got really big in a different style, in the bluegrass style, and that was Mumford & Sons. But even they went electric after a little while. So there are stabs here and there where a little bit more musicianship is even surfacing in the more modern age, but I don't even hear about them anymore. And I don't follow modern stuff very much unless someone happens to ask me something very specific like you've done. And normally I'm appalled when I see something that's come out in the year I'm currently living in, which I was completely appalled by all the music that you, and I use that word lightly, that you sent to me. But again, I wanted to finish the last thought before it slips my mind. Crrow and I were trying to figure out, in the years to come, the music that's coming out now, what is going to be music that stands the test of time? Things like Led Zeppelin and the Beatles and Pink Floyd, despite what backgrounds there might be there for manipulation as well, just talking about the musicianship. And one of the interesting things we came up with was, like, think about how much classical influence is there, what we would call real music, serious musicianship, you have to have massive capability to compose classical music, and I mean like full orchestration and things like that. And of course, a lot of this music that's still standing up today does have a lot of that kind of composition mixed in with it, even if it's a rock album.
Yeah, I can't see podcasts taking place in 50 years' time analysing the deep musical complexity of One Direction. Or even Ed Sheeran. I just can't see it happening. You know, how many shows do you hear now where people are still taking apart the music of the Beatles?
Right.
Or the Rolling Stones, or the Doors, or Pink Floyd, or Led Zeppelin. You know, what acts around today are going to be spoken of in those terms in even 10 years? There's just none that I can think
That's what
of.
we were getting at. And we had stripped it all the way back to what's the latest album we can think of that will still stand the test of time in 20 years, 30 years, 50 years. I mean, when you're talking about the Beatles and that era, you're talking about 50 plus years now. And we had whittled it all the way back to Pink Floyd's The Wall, which came out in 1979. And even they fell apart after that. That was it. They completely blew their load. One of the best albums ever done. Incredibly well orchestrated. And again, tons of compositional work all over that. It had the great musicianship of those four people, plus a lot of other stuff going on. And what's an album between the 80s, 90s, and 2000s that might still be being listened to 50 years from now, like Pink Floyd's The Wall? And I was trying to argue the point about certain genres and things like that, but he was saying, even take Guns N' Roses, who I never liked, but it was an attempt to get back to just straightforward, stripped-down guitar rock. But even they just kind of get lapped into the rest of the butt rock of the 80s, you know, the teased hair and the tight jeans that are ripped up and just that same generic 80s look. So he might be right. Is The Wall the last album in history?
Would Crrow not consider Nirvana? Nevermind.
We talked about that, and of course, he doesn't think much of them anyway, but he thinks that's just recycled punk. And he's not wrong. It has a slightly different sound, but really, that raw, just screaming your head off, real simplistic 3 or 4 chords kind of thing.
I would throw in there probably Soul to Soul's debut album in 1989, Club Classics Volume 1. And also what comes to mind is Goldie's record called Timeless, appropriately enough, from 1995, which was very pioneering drum and bass. But you could make the argument that that is sort of black music, dance music, so it's niche, it's a particular genre, not everyone is into that, so it wouldn't have mass appeal. So they're two albums that sprang to mind from 89 and 95. But yeah, I take the point in terms of...
But it's 2020. That's the whole point.
I know.
Even if we strip it back to 95, we're talking about how many years ago now?
25 years. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a long time to be without good music, man.
So I hope that gives people food for thought. That I thought that conversation that he and I had would have relevance to this conversation, and I'm glad we were able to bring that up, because even you're seeing it. Even if we took the two you said, you're still talking about a long ago decade at this point.
Yeah, 25, 30 years.
Right.
Just going back to Ed Sheeran, who we mentioned, there's been efforts to market him to the urban music crowd in recent times. So he's been appearing on rap records and, promoted to black audiences. And he even picked up a bunch of MOBO awards the other year, which is completely ridiculous to me. Music of Black Origin. He swept the board at those a few years ago. You know, this ginger twat gets up there and takes all these black music awards, and that upset a lot of people in those communities, rightfully so. But it's obvious there are efforts at play to make him palatable to those kind of buyers, that kind of crowd. And he crops up on Eminem's latest album. So Eminem dropped an album last week, apparently out of the blue. Nobody was expecting it. It hadn't been pre-announced. And the first single from it is this track called Darkness. I posted the video to it the other day, along with a bit of commentary. I don't know if you saw that. Did you catch up with that?
No, unfortunately not.
Right. Well, this is incredible. I'll put the link to this in the show notes, and people might want to take a look at it on YouTube. So... just going back to what we were talking about, all these different agendas and stuff that's getting put out there in lyrics now that never used to be the case. So Eminem is rapping again about gun violence, mental illness, murder, mayhem, mutilation. So, his usual subjects, 20 years on. But this one has him talking about, he's getting nervous before he goes on stage at this show in Vegas. And he's popping pharmaceutical meds, and he's, getting just freaking out at the thought of having to go on stage. And he's juxtaposing those lyrics with those that are coming from the perspective of Stephen Paddock, the Las Vegas shooter from that Harvest Festival, the country music event of a couple of years ago. And so he then starts assuming the character of Paddock, and he's talking about, I'm going to just freak out and blast all these people at this show and just shoot anything that moves, and then I'm going to turn the gun on myself and blow my own head off. And you see all this being depicted in the video. Isn't it incredible what can be got away with under the guise of, in inverted commas, entertainment? Can you imagine if you or I decided to put out a video from the perspective of Stephen Paddock, and we're talking about blowing away all these people and just going crazy with a gun at this music concert? I think we would probably have a knock on the door in a very short period of time, and we'd have some explaining to do. But an artist, in inverted commas, like Eminem, seems to encounter no such problems. And so we have this track, Darkness, which is put out there as entertainment, music, leisure, fun, what people just choose to listen to in their free time. And the whole thing, when you get to the end of the video, it's part of this anti-gun lobby agenda that we have.
Oh, big surprise.
And they're encouraging people at the end to vote against gun ownership in America. So it's just all part of that whole process, as if, voting is going to change anything, because it has such a great track record of fixing all the world's problems, doesn't it? But that's what that's all about. So there's another agenda being pushed there. At the same time, you've got Eminem talking about murder, mutilation, and pharmaceutical med abuse and all this. And it's all put out there as entertainment.
Well, if you or I tried to release a track like that, Facebook wouldn't allow it, YouTube wouldn't allow it, like all the platforms you would normally try and market yourself.
Well, I was speaking about it there, and I was wondering if this bloody podcast is going to get dumped from YouTube just because of certain words that I used there.
Yeah. Hey, we've had problems with that with Crrow 777 Radio. We've had things. I had an episode I did years ago on Secrets of Saturn that sat there for years, and they finally yanked it down. And it was me discussing things with David Weiss on false flag stuff. And you can cut this out if you don't want those words said here. But yeah, they're scrubbing the internet, man. Of anything that we do that's not approved content gets pulled. And, of course, that whole event is highly suspect. I don't know exactly what went down, but the official story, like so many of the official stories, is incredibly unbelievable, especially looking at the way that this person would have had to perform the events ascribed to him.
Exactly. All right, so I've got one last question for you before we finish up here. It's one that I get all the time from people. Anytime I open up a Q&A on my YouTube, this question always comes up. And it's to do with 432 versus 440 hertz, where 432 is supposed to be the harmonic frequency that we should all be listening to our music pitched at, and 440 is anything but. As a professional musician and producer, would you say there is any weight to the idea that 432 is the one and 440 is to be avoided? What's the truth about all this?
I've seen a lot of arguments on both sides, but in my personal opinion, there's something to it, but I have to break that down and explain it. There's a vast difference to the way the music comes across. Let's just say you take Let It Be by the Beatles, which is a song I happen to really like, and I think it's very heartfelt. Whether there's more intention there or not, of course, you can discuss. But it was recorded, of course, in 440, and lots of people take pre-recorded music like that they happen to really like and bounce it down to 432. I would argue that there's a big difference between taking something that was recorded purely in 440, and we're talking about waves here when you think about that. 440 hertz, 440 cycles per second, and the entire thing was done that way, and you're bouncing it down 8 cycles to 432 cycles per second. I would say that there's a big difference between that and the way that I do music, or our friend Alex Michael does music, and a lot of people are picking up on, and that's recording all of your individual tracks from the ground up at 432 and having the collective effect, the final product in 432 built on the intent of the 432 the whole way. Because I personally feel, and I think there's evidence to back this up, that everything we do in this life is about the intent behind it. So the intent that we put behind recording music in 432 is very different than a lot of the intent put behind 440, especially when you're talking about mainstream releases.
Okay, I think we're about done here, mate. So do you want to direct listeners to where they can get hold of Secrets of Saturn, what you're doing with Crrow, and any other projects you've got on the go at the moment that you want to promote?
Yeah, I'm a very busy guy these days. I, of course, am the co-host on Crrow 777 Radio. So we release a new episode every week. That's CRROW777radio.com. Every Thursday we release a new episode. And I would say at this point we have a very good reputation for being on the cutting edge of trying to push the envelope on what truth is, or breaking down what it is in our universe that's thrown at us day after day. Then I have my own channel on YouTube called Secrets of Saturn, where I brought back the podcast and I started doing weekly live streams with my friend Wayne McCroy plus guests. That's every Wednesday. Plus the videos will, of course, be available on the channel. That's every Wednesday. I'm in Central Time, so I always just say it in my own. That's 8 to 10 Central. Adjust accordingly. And Crrow and I are going to start doing a live stream since I've been having so much success with those. We're going to start doing a live stream every 6 p.m. Eastern Sunday, also on my Secrets of Saturn channel. Then there's the film that Crrow and I did that I've now won 4 awards from film festivals for, that's available on Vimeo on demand, and that is called Shoot the Moon. We've had tons of success with that. I'm very, very happy that's had the impact it has. And we just, as of the other day, digitally released the soundtrack for Shoot the Moon because it was composed by a dual doctorate professor of music who's a very good friend of mine. His name is Brett William Dietz. Incredibly talented individual. Original soundtrack score that he did for the whole film, and that's available if you just look up on CD Baby. We have the artist store as Crrow 777, again CRROW 777, and the Shoot the Moon soundtrack. It's available digitally, and people are asking for CDs, so I'm looking for a good deal to have some of those printed up as well.
Okay, no auto-tune, I trust.
No auto-tune.
Excellent. And I'm about to jump on one of your shows as a guest talking about mind control in James Bond movies. So people might want to look for that. It should be out by the time this show is. But other than that, Jason, I just want to thank you for coming on today, man. It's been a great chat.
Mark, I love everything you do. I have all the respect in the world for your capabilities, and I'm really happy that you invited me on. Thank you so much.
This is just for fun. I'm picking up vibrations. I'm picking up good vibrations. I'm picking up